Well, good evening, everyone. Meteorologist Michael Wilhite here, wilhitewx.com. It is a little after 6 o'clock Central Time as I'm recording this video, and we've got round one of our winter weather extravaganza starting to roll through the Ohio Valley here. You can see a live look at radar here. You've got some snow moving in from Illinois into central Indiana, and eventually this will start to overtake much of the state. You see there's a little bit starting to build down here. Now it's going to be certainly more of an accumulating snow the further north into Indiana as you get here, but there could still be some light accumulations out of this. As we take a look at the loop here over the past 2 hours, you can see how fast this is moving in. Let's dive into the data here and just really quickly let me show you how this sort of moves through, and you can see again as you go through some of this there are some hints that it does stretch down here into parts of southern Indiana as it rolls through here this evening time. It's not going to put down a ton of accumulations. In fact, the further you get into the night, the more this wave starts to fizzle out, the further it gets on into Ohio. Now, what can you expect out of this first wave of things tonight? Well, the first wave of things tonight, you're going to have to, if you want an inch or more, you're going to have to really go up towards Indianapolis and points on towards Terre Haute and to the north. That's where you could get a couple of inches out of this, up to a couple of inches here. Maybe 3 or 4 inches as you head far up to the north towards Lake Michigan. But down here for most of southern Indiana, you're going to be looking at a coating to 1 inch. And, honestly, a ½ inch might be stretching it for some of us. It's not going to be a big event tonight. And some of you may not even get a coating in this area. It just depends on how far south everything decides to go. Again, as I put this into motion, you notice not everybody really gets this. It's going to be sort of hit and miss. Again, future radars are imperfect, but here's an idea for what that might look like. The bigger event certainly is going to be Tuesday night. About 24 hours from now, we're going to be facing what could be a pretty significant winter weather setup with some ice and some snow. It's not going to be an overwhelming amount of snow, but certainly the ice could be a troubling component. And regardless, the end result's going to be the same. There's going to be travel difficulties during this. So let's dive through the data. Here's the Euro model, and you can see the Euro model sees that wave moving through tonight very well. It does not take it quite as far south as what the high-res data does, but nonetheless, you see it's still there. You go through the day tomorrow, and here we are at about, this is 7 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow night, and it hasn't moved in yet. There's some differences still on timing, and we should be able to get those timing differences worked out a little better tomorrow once the high-res the HER model, which is the 18-hour short, one of the best models that we have for these kind of events, gets involved in the equation. As you move into the overnight hours, though, here's 1 o'clock Eastern time, and you notice that you've got the storm starting to move in, and what you have here in the pink shades here is freezing rain starting to break out over the area, and you've got snow just starting to nose in here with rain down in for Kentucky. And as we put this forward in time, another few hours later, 6 hours later here, by the time you wake up at 7 a.m., you got snow coming down at a pretty good clip over southern Indiana. And by that time in those 6 hours, you notice that the freezing rain has moved mostly south of the Ohio River. And then as you move off from there, it'll move out of the area. So it's a very fast hitting storm. It starts to us sometime between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. is when the lead bands arrive in the area, and then here we are at 7 a.m., and then here we are by 1 p.m., and we're mostly we're out of the state here, just about out of the picture here. So we're not looking at a tremendously long duration event as far as that goes. Now, the freezing rain could be significant. Weather Prediction Center still puts us under a slight risk for at least 1/4 of an inch. A moderate risk, parts of Kentucky down here closer towards Paducah. So again, there you see the angle of where the greatest risk of the freezing rain could be there. And if you want multiple inches of snow, they also forecast for risks for greater than 4 inches of snow, but you see nothing in our area. That's all moved off up towards the New England states there. So not really looking at significant accumulations of 4 inches or more. We're, as I show you the snowcast map here in a minute, we're looking more like just a couple, 3 inches at most around the area. Let me just show you really quickly that the other models are in good agreement with this. As we look at the Canadian model, here you go. This would be 7 p.m. right here tomorrow night. Nothing's come in yet. Here's 10 p.m. Eastern time, and finally here's 1 a.m., and you start to see it moving in. There's your freezing rain. A little bit hard to see on this, but there's your freezing rain sort of right over in here, right hugging along the Ohio River, and then as you go over in time, that starts to move off to the east a little bit and get a little bit heavier as it goes through. And as you wake up at 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning, a pretty good freezing rain event for most of the area with some light snows on the backside. This would lead to not very much snow in the areas where you got freezing rain at all. If you look at the GFS also in a very similar manner here, but it increases the freezing rain threat pretty significantly and does have at least a little bit of light snow on the backside of that. Again, about the same time though, by the time you go about 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. or so on Wednesday, this is all gone from the area. If you look at snow accumulations with this, you notice here's the GFS model, and in some places where you get some of the freezing rain, remember the model does have some freezing rain in this corridor right here, but you still on the back side of that getting maybe an inch or so of potential snow accumulation there. There's some hints that it gets a little bit higher up towards Cincinnati. We'll see. I'm not totally convinced on that yet. As you look towards the Canadian model, you notice it's a little bit different, and you don't, in the places where you get the freezing rain, you don't get as much snow. So there's still some level of uncertainty with that as well, and the freezing rain accumulation. Both the GFS and the Canadian are showing pretty much about the same positioning on where that would be. The Canadian here is a little bit more boisterous than what the GFS is overall, but the GFS does have, look at this, 0.4 of an inch of freezing rain accumulations for Evansville and 0.42 inches of freezing rain there falling in Louisville, and that's a 0.61 though underneath of the Canadian and 0.32 there under the Canadian for Evansville. Either way, I think these are probably a little bit overdone. If you think back to the Martin Luther King weekend storm that we had, again, what you saw is freezing rain total similar to this being shown for us, and then the day of the event, the high-res data kicked in and said, nah, just joshing you, it's going to be sleet. And it was a little bit of a colder thermal profile. It turned out to be more sleet than it did freezing rain. Turned over to sleet pretty quickly. That led to not as much of a glaze of ice on things, and we saw the ice pellets, which is what sleet is. Now, if we're going to get any ice, that's the way to do it. You don't want freezing rain, because freezing rain can accumulate and start to accrete that ice on the power lines and drag those down. So you can end up with power outages if you get a totals like this. Whereas if you get ice pellets, well, the ice pellets aren't going to stick to a power line, so you don't generally get power outages as issues with that. So if we're going to have something, certainly it's better to end up having the sleet. So that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on, and tomorrow morning, once we get into that high-res data as it goes through the morning, we should be able to get a clearer picture of that. But I do think up to 1/4 of an inch of ice looks reasonable at this point if we're going through freezing rain. If it turns out to be a good pop. If it turns out to be just a little bit more on the sleet side than it does the freezing rain side, you could get an inch of sleet with a situation like this. We'll just have to see. All right, but there's going to be an ice component for some of you. Now, the further north you go, the less that ice component is then going to be. That's the reality of this. We'll show you this really quickly. The high-res NAM is in not good agreement with the rest. It sees this as well, but as it comes through tomorrow night, I wanted to point this out, that it's very splotchy. And you see that it doesn't have radar filled in much at all. And it doesn't give much of anything for us. That's the outlier. It's the only model right now that's doing this. So that's either going to be a major win for the NAM, or it's going to be an epic fail. And right now, given that it's the complete outlier, it looks like an epic fail. But I want to just show you this to say that there is some data that suggests maybe it's not as bad as what it could be. And as we get into the higher res data tomorrow, hopefully we'll be able to see that. I hope the NAM's right. I hope we don't get as much freezing rain as what the other models are suggesting. I never want to throw out completely or a 100% discount high-res data, because it is built for situations like this, whereas global models, the GFS, Euro, Canadian, they paint in broad brushes. High-res data can sometimes see those finer details. I hope it's right, but it's the outlier right now, so we'll take it with a grain of salt then, sort of as far as that goes. Real quick also, if you're wondering why there are no winter storm watches, this is the latest forecast discussion from the National Weather Service in Louisville. And they just say this, given these amounts are below criteria for a winter storm warning, and there are still some differences in thermal profiles, temperature profiles. Again, is it going to be freezing rain? Is it going to be sleet? We'll hold off on any watches or advisories for now. However, travel impacts are expected for southern Indiana and portions of north central Kentucky on Wednesday morning. Temperatures are forecast to rise above freezing on Wednesday, yes, during the afternoon, but during the morning time, the commute is going to be rough. This is one of the bad things about the National Weather Service, and I don't want to down those guys, too much because they work hard and they're good at what they do, but they are bound by some old, outdated, ridiculous rules that say, you can't issue a winter storm watch unless it meets this particular criteria here. You can't issue a winter storm warning unless it meets this criteria, or otherwise it's a winter weather advisory. You can't have a winter weather advisory if it's more than this many hours out. And all these things can be good, but they can also be very limiting. And so here you are 24 hours now from the onset of this event, and there's no headline product out there, and all they're doing in a text product is saying, expect some travel impacts. Well, honestly, that's an outdated method that's not very good. It would be much easier and much smarter for them to just issue some sort of a warning or a watch to alert people that haven't seen this yet to know that something is coming. But I don't work for the National Weather Service, and they don't ask my opinion. I don't think they care about my opinion. But for what it's worth, got a long way to go to modernize the National Weather Service. And unfortunately, we just have to sort of deal with it. But in my opinion, pretty ridiculous. Regardless, whether you underneath of a watch or whether you ever go under a watch or a warning or whether you go with a winter weather advisory, the impacts are still going to be the same. There's some freezing rain coming for some of you along the Ohio River and snow for the rest of you in Indiana. And there's going to be travel impacts, and they could be pretty significant with that. So here's what my snow forecast looks like. This is my first call. I'll update this again tomorrow once we get some higher res data in here. Again, we've got that first wave moving through tonight. That second wave of precip arrives on Tuesday evening. It's mainly going to be mostly an overnight event. The ice near the Ohio River could be up to 1/4 of an inch. That's what you see here in the red zone, up to 1/4 of an inch of ice in the red zone. And then after that ice, a light coating of snow up to about an inch. Maybe locally higher, but I don't think you're going to get much higher. Up here in the blue, it's going to be just mostly all snow, and that's where you could get 1 to 3 inches of the white stuff falling down. And to the south of that in the green, it's mostly going to be rain. So that's the way things look to me right now, folks. Again, I'll have another update for this tomorrow as we get into the event, as we see what's certainly going to go on. Tomorrow we'll have the advantage of having some high-res data, some good, hopefully good high-res data mixed into there, and we'll be able to fine-tune things a little bit more. But as of now, regardless, again, whether you go under a winter storm watch or a winter storm warning or a winter weather advisory, it really just doesn't make a hill of beans difference. The impacts are going to be the same. And whether you ever go under one or not, look on this map and you'll get an idea of what's coming to you. So outdated rules for the National Weather Service, as frustrating as they are or not, the impacts are going to come whether they decide to drag their feet and issue something or not. Expect some travel impacts overnight on Tuesday night, and the travel impact on Wednesday morning certainly looks real at this point. And, good news, we will warm up to above freezing over a good chunk of the area on Wednesday. So by the time the Wednesday evening comes on, we may be starting the melting process, and Thursday certainly would probably be a little bit better. We are going to, I'll close with this. Let me go over here onto my folders here, and I'll pull up the latest 7-day forecast just to give you an idea of what to expect here. And then here's the latest forecast that I issued this morning. And again, we warm up to about 38 tomorrow, but tomorrow night we go to 27. We warm up to the low to mid 30s on Thursday, but look at this, or Wednesday rather, but then look at this. You go 36 Thursday, 47 Friday. Another system rolls in this weekend, but it looks rain to me at this point. There is a chance that it could be a rain-snow mix for part of this as you get into the evening hours on the back side of this system, but I'm very skeptical of it at this point. But we are underneath of a warming trend, at least a little bit later in this week. But we've got some ice and snow likely to deal with tomorrow, depending on where you are. And overall, still going to be below normal. Normal high is 45, and we don't make it above normal, but only one day here in the updated 7 days. So it's going to be a pretty cool next set of days, no matter how you look at it. That's it for this update, folks. I'll have more updates throughout the night and throughout tomorrow. I'm meteorologist Michael Wilhite, WilhiteWX.com. Have a great night. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at WilhiteWX for more continuing coverage. Southern Indiana weather on Facebook. Have a great night.